Okay, I believe we are good to go. So let me stop that share for a moment. Well, folks, just want to welcome you and thank you very much for coming along to this morning's session. We're going to kick off absolutely on time. I see that we do have a few more people who are kind of half in and half out, that they're just in the process of getting their sound connected up and so on and so forth. So welcome to everybody who's in via the webinar system, and welcome to everybody as well who is in live on Facebook. So you're very welcome to this session. We're going to run about 60 minutes this morning, and then a couple of questions on top of it. A little bit of housekeeping. First off, when we get going, I'm going to, I beg your pardon, I already have everybody muted, and I'm going to leave it that way just for the quality of the recording and so on and so forth. On your console, if you're logged in, you will notice that there is a facility for chat, and there is a facility for Q&A. Now, the chat I'm going to use in the session a little bit later on. For now, I'll ask you just to leave that to one side. And then there's a Q&A section. Now, to keep things on time, what I'm going to suggest is that we work our way through the session. And then when we get to the end of the session, I'll take whatever questions you put up on the Q&A system and can bring some of you on if you want to talk and actually interact on the questions. So as you go through the session, as we talk through, if any questions occur to you, just pop them up in Q&A. Don't think I haven't seen them. Well, actually, I won't have seen them, but don't think that I'm ignoring them. I'm going to come to them right at the very end of the session. There's also, as I say, a chat facility there, and I'm going to ask you to do a little bit of interaction with me, just share some data with me as we work through the session this morning. So I think we're pretty much good to go. Let me check my checklist to make sure we're good to go. So I've got the recording going. I've welcomed you. I've told you about the Q&A. We start the recording. So let's let me get my screen shared up here. And I am going to, and I don't need my sound, and we'll get ourselves going. Okay, so you're very, very welcome. So what we're going to talk about today is how you as coaches, consultants, or trainers can use emotional intelligence to build your practice, build your business. Now, I'm conscious from some of the descriptions of people under emails that some of the people on the call are not independent coaches, consultants, and trainers, so they don't have a separate business per se. But don't go away, because you obviously have clients, and you obviously service those clients in no manner, in no way different to the way independent coaches, consultants, and trainers do. So I think the message that we have here today is just as relevant for you. So let's get started. People, the first thing I think it's really important when I talk about how you can build your coach, consulting, and training business with emotional intelligence, it's kind of important that we define, what do I mean by emotional intelligence? Because the concept has been around since 96 or 96 or 98 when Goleman brought his book out. But I think it's often misdefined and frequently misunderstood. And if you ask people of my vintage, very frequently, you ask them about emotional intelligence, they think it's all huggy, nice guy type of stuff. And I think we need to disabuse people of that and get at what exactly is the emotional intelligence that has been shown by independent study and by neuroscience over the last 10 or 15 years to be absolutely instrumental in driving great relationships with people and measurable bottom line business results. Now, I'm going to ask, I had a little bit of an issue last time I used this platform, and as soon as I switched on the Facebook feed, the screen went to quarter. So I'm just going to ask Crystal or one of the folks who are on the line, or anybody else, just tell me, are you seeing the screen properly? I'd say, just put it onto the chat there for me if you wouldn't mind. Is the screen coming up clearly? I'm going to carry on regardless and assuming that it is. So thank you, Nadine. That's super. Really appreciate that. So let's move on. God, the tech can really trip you up sometimes. So what is emotional intelligence? Well, when I invited you to the session here today, I suggested that you download a workbook. If you didn't, don't panic. Just grab a piece of paper and a pen. and we're going to do an exercise. If you did download the workbook, it'll structure things a little bit more, and this is what you'd be looking at. So I'd like you please to open up the first page of that workbook, or if you're just working with a piece of paper, well then just grab your pen and get ready to go. And what I want you to think about in the first instance is the best boss you ever worked for. Now, the best boss is the boss that you think, man, those were good times. I would be happy to work with that person again. I'd have no hesitation working with them again. So that's what I mean by a great boss. Now, if you haven't been blessed to work with somebody like that, and sometimes in these audiences, we do get people who just haven't been lucky enough to have that experience, well, then I'd like you to think of a coworker, a mentor, a coach, somebody who was particularly easy to work with, good to work with, inspiring, and who brought out the best in you. Okay, so ideally, I'd like you to think of the best boss and write that person's name down on the top of your sheet if you got the workbook on, or on the top of that piece of paper. So just write that person's name down just for your reference. In a moment, I'm going to read out 6 statements. The 6 statements are behaviors, and the good thing is they're very observable behaviors, the things that people do or don't do typically in the course of interacting with people. And I'm going to ask you to, thinking of that great boss, to consider how often did he or she display that behavior? How often did they demonstrate that behavior? How often did you see them show it? And I'll give you a few examples of some of the ones that are a little bit, that need a little bit of elucidation. So let's start with this one. So when by the way, and so I'm asking you, to what extent did that person demonstrate awareness of their mood and emotions? Now look down the bottom of the screen. There's a key there, and it says, if they did it significantly less than others, in other words, you probably never saw it, well then they'd be a 1. If it was absolutely typical of their everyday behavior, it's a 5, and there's a scale that's running from 1 to 5 to allow you to put it in between. Now, what do I mean by demonstrates awareness of their mood and emotions? I was in a meeting a few months back with a colleague, and we knew that meeting was going to become fraught. We knew there was going to be a little bit of friction because the previous version of it had ended a little bit tense, if you want to call it. And you've been at those meetings, right? You've been at a meeting where, or you've gone to a meeting where, you know, man, I could live without this. This is going to be tough, and I don't like conflict. Or even if you like conflict, you could do without it probably. But we went into this meeting, myself and a colleague, and just as things were getting to that point where it was starting to get a little bit heated, and people were starting to say things maybe they shouldn't say, and this is the way tough meetings go. Difficult conversations go this way. And we were getting to the crux of it. My colleague got up and she left the room. And I thought, and in the moment, I thought, you know, God, you could time those bathroom breaks a little bit better, you know, and I felt honestly a little bit exposed. A few minutes later, she came back in. She sat back down. We continued on with the meeting, and everything, you know, the way things do, we stress about so many things and worrying about what's going to happen. And invariably, the majority of those things we stress about don't. And this meeting was exactly the same as that. It was one of those situations where there was no need for stressing because we got it sorted out. There was a little bit of friction. And I said afterwards to the colleague, you know, you really left me kind of swinging there. I felt you could have timed your bathroom break a little bit better. And she said, Derek, that wasn't a bathroom break. Excuse me. She said, I was getting a little bit ticked off at some of the things that were being said, and I didn't trust myself not to react in anger. So I just got up and walked around the office for a moment and came back in. And so she demonstrated tremendous awareness of her mood and emotion. She knew that she was being triggered. She knew that she was likely to say something she didn't want to say. So she demonstrated that awareness of her mood and emotions. And if I saw my great boss doing that on a regular basis, I'd be giving them a 5 or a 4. So please now give that great boss, best boss you ever worked for, a score between 1 and 5. Excuse me. Second behavior, I don't think it needs a tremendous amount of explanation. To what extent did this person make other people feel appreciated? So 5 is, that was absolutely what they were all about. 1 is, don't think I ever saw it at all, wasn't part of their modus operandum, and you've got a scale from 1 to 5. If they were about the same as anybody else, about average, they're a 3. So give them a score between 1 and 5. Another one that's fairly obvious, and it's obvious and everybody understands it, but you know what, isn't it tough? Isn't it seriously very, very tough to confess up when you have screwed up, particularly when it's going to reflect badly upon you? So to what extent did that person remain open and honest about mistakes, even under pressure? So 5, scrupulously honest. 1, not at all. And 3, yeah, they were flexible enough. Sometimes yes, sometimes no. So give them a score now. And here's another one that's really easy to do when there's nothing at stake. Make ethical decisions. Make the right decision. Do what you're told or do what you need to do in the right way. And so making ethical decisions is, as I say, easy when there's nothing at stake. Was this person an ethical person? Did they make ethical decisions? Were they informed by a moral or ethical code? 5, yeah, absolutely. 1, not at all, and 3 in between. So give them a score between 1 and 5. When my colleague left that meeting, first thing she did in just deciding to leave was she demonstrated an awareness of her mood and emotions. But then she managed her emotions very effectively in that situation. She knew she was going to be triggered. She became aware of it. She got up and she left the room. I'm sure you've done it sometimes. Your mom probably told you, count to 10, take a deep breath. There are lots of strategies. Some people use them, some people don't. When we're under difficult emotions, so anger, fear, depression, anxiety, when the heat is on and we're under stress, that tells us how good we are at managing our emotions. So to what extent did this person manage their emotions effectively in difficult situations? 5, they were Zen-like. They were absolutely calm regardless of what went on. 1 was, they were a little bit like a firework. Anything went wrong, anything went sideways, it was like lighting the blue paper. You stand back and just watch the explosion. So are they a firework down at the one end, or are they a Zen master up at the 5 end? Or are they kind of somewhere in between at the 3? So give them a score between 1 and 5. And then finally, recognizes others' hard work and achievements. For me, there is little you can do, and this is, by the way, this is my personal experience, but it's also my experience from conducting the biggest study that was ever done into what makes leaders inspiring and charismatic. And one of the things that came out of that was recognition is still one of the strongest things that you can give to somebody. And great leaders, they recognize that. So to what extent did this person go out of their way to recognize other people's hard work and achievements? Were they a 5? They're always doing it, always finding ways to do it. 1 never did it at all. So draw a line under that. And if I've given you the instructions right, you should have a score that's somewhere between 5 and 30. And we'll come back to that in a moment. So now we're going to, as my American colleagues would say, we're going to turn things to dark a little. Oh, no, we're not yet. Sorry, I beg your pardon. Let me ask you a question. And there's a show of hands facility there. And let me have a look if I can get that show of hands facility up. I believe that I probably can. Yes, I can. So what I'd like you to do is just tell me, do you know anybody who, when they walk into the room, they suck the energy and the oxygen and the positivity out of the room? So they walk in and the mood dives. Put your hand up if you do know somebody like that. Yeah, so I got 1 hand, 2 hands, 3 hands. I'm seeing a trend, so I think 4 hands, and I think it's going to go that way. I think we all do. And I'll ask you also, you know, on the other side of things, do you know anybody who, when they walk into a room, has the opposite effect? That they kind of raise the temperature of the room. They make it feel a little bit more positive. You feel a little bit lighter. And again, thank you, Nadine. The first hand is up. 2 participants, 3, 4. So we all know that. And one of the things that you're going to see in this session today is the way we show up. even the way we walk into the room has a tremendous impact on people. And this great boss, when you dealt with them, will have had an impact on you when you were working with them. And I want you to tune back. If it's back in time, I want you to think a little bit about it and just think, what was it like to be around this person? What did you feel like? So put down a few words, a few bullet points that just say, how did you feel? If you felt downbeat, sad, depressed, anxious when you were around them, put that down. And if you felt upbeat, positive, engaged, whatever comes into your mind as your experience of that person, put that down. And I'm going to give you, because I'm guilty always of rushing a little bit, I'm going to give you about, let me see, I'll give you 10 seconds just to get a couple of bullet points on there, because it's important to the conversation we have later in the session. So that's 5 seconds. Man, 10 seconds seems like a long time when you're on one of these events to go quiet, which is why you'll notice I haven't gone quiet. Okay, so that's how they made you feel. So, and finally, I want you to think about that person and tell me, to what extent did they motivate you? Now, if you're familiar with employee engagement, you might have heard the expression discretionary effort. Don't worry if you haven't. Discretionary effort is that extra little piece of effort that people give when they're engaged with a job. When they're working with a job, with a team, in a place where they really feel they're in the zone and they like being there and they enjoy it. It's variously described as engagement, and the extra bit of effort, that going the extra mile, is often described in the literature as discretionary effort. And I think people end up engaged like that because of the relationship they have with people and the relationship they have with the work, but we'll explore that a little bit later on. For now, I want you to think, what was it like to be around that person? How did they motivate you? And what discretionary effort did they make you want to give? Now, I'm not asking you how hard did you work. The majority of people in this world, when they make an agreement and they shake hands and they say, I'll take that job, boss, and they take a salary, will do the best they can. They'll give the best effort they can. What I'd like you to think about instead, on a scale of 1 to 10, how motivated were you to give of your best? How often did you find yourself going that extra mile, probably without even realizing? 1, 2, 3 is, I wasn't motivated at all. That this person just didn't do it for me. I did what was necessary to get from check to check. That was the motivation I felt. And 8, 9, 10 is, God, I would have run through a brick wall for that person. So 8, 9, 10, highly motivated, wanted to go that extra mile, and we're conscious of that. And 1, 2, 3, not at all. So, and finally, keep jumping ahead of my slides, we're going to turn to the dark side. If there are any Star Wars fans on, if that was Luke Skywalker or Han Solo, and I'm not a big fan, well, then we're turning to Darth Vader. And I want you to think, in fact, do me a favor, ignore the word challenging on that screen. I want you to think of the worst boss you ever had, the most difficult boss you ever had. How do you know they're the most difficult? This would be the last person I would ever want to work for again. And probably the first person that came into your mind is that person. So if you've been blessed and you haven't had one of those people in your life, well, then think of a coworker, a mentor, a coach who had that off switch effect on you, who were just turned you off, just dragged you down. And again, put their name on the top of the paper. And we're going to do the same exercise. It'll move a little bit quicker this time. So we're going to look at that person through the lens of those behaviors. And I'm going to ask you first, give them a score between 1 and 5 for how well they demonstrated awareness of their mood and emotions. So 1 is the lowest score. That's they didn't demonstrate at all, or significantly less than others. 5, absolutely knew, were aware when they were triggered, and so on. So to what extent were they aware of their mood and emotions? 1 low, 5 high. Again, to what extent did they make people feel appreciated? 1 is low, 5 is high. 5, absolutely them. 1, absolutely not them. 3, yeah, they were average. Isn't it a blessing to be called average? So they were average. 3 is average. 3 is open and honest about mistakes. Score between 1 and 5, please. 4, made ethical decisions. 5, managed their emotions effectively in difficult situations. Low end is the firework. Anything went wrong, boom. High end is the Zen master. Anything went wrong, don't worry, be calm, breathe. They were just present. And finally, to what extent did they recognize others' hard work and achievements? So once again, I'm going to ask you if you wouldn't mind just adding that up. And again, if I've given you good instructions, you'll have a score that runs between 5 and 30. I have to say, in live sessions, sometimes we get scores on this particular person that run below the 0. People will ask, can I put a negative number in there? It's one of the side effects of asking for the worst boss that the person ever had. But just add it up and get that score. And again, I'm going to ask you, what was it like to be around that person? But more specifically, tuning back in to yourself back at that time. How did they make you feel? How did you feel at the end of the day going home? How did you feel at the beginning of the day going in, knowing you were going to be working with them? How did you describe them to other people in the way they made you feel? So a few words on that. Let me give you that 10 seconds again. And this time I'll try 10 seconds of silence. Not easy for an Irish guy. Wow, I did it. Okay. And finally, how motivated were you to go that extra mile? So did they turn you absolutely on so much that you'd have walked over hot coals and you'd have done anything to help them be successful and help them achieve what they were trying to achieve? Or that'd be an 8, 9, 10. 1, 2, 3, they really didn't motivate me at all. I would, my inclination, particularly when I was tired, I was down, I was under the weather, was do the minimum to get by. And 4, 5, 6, 7 is somewhere in between. It's kind of average. Okay. So I'm going to come back to that in a moment. I haven't introduced myself. This is the I'm Derek McCann and I'm wonderful slide. I think the most important piece on there is I am the head of international development for a company called Genos International. And Genos was founded in 2002, 2 years or 3 years after Dr. Ben Palmer wrote a thesis specifically on how does one use emotional intelligence to, in a measurable way, develop people in a commercial environment. And since 2002, Genos has risen to be one of the leading emotional intelligence assessment and solution providers worldwide. I'll show you some of our clients later on. Importantly for the audience that's here today, we have about 1,200 partners worldwide, probably about 1,500 on the books, about 1,200 who are active at this point in time. Worth mentioning to you, particularly those of you who are steeped in assessments and you understand the importance of science behind assessments. Genos was born on the campus of Swinburne University, where Dr. Palmer did his PhD. So all of the research that went into this tool and continues to go into this tool was conducted under very, very rigorous conditions. And so you'll see as we work through this that all of our research is peer reviewed. And you can see that it's published up on the website. That's kind of, for those of you who are not familiar with the idea, peer reviewed is kind of gold standard of scientific publication. And bottom line, it just says that what we do works. And what Ben set out to do was, against the background, bring your mind back to, say, year 2000. For 4 or 5 years, Goleman's work had been out there, and people were very excited. Maybe you remember the cover of Time magazine had Daniel Goleman talking about, no, it didn't have Daniel Goleman. It had a picture of Daniel Goleman's book on the front cover. There was a great amount of excitement because what Goleman showed through a huge amount of meta-analysis was that emotional intelligence factors were about twice as important in predicting success for pretty much everybody in pretty much every endeavor than intellectual quotient. So your brains are very, very useful, and having a very big brain is very, very useful. But what's twice as useful is being emotionally intelligent, the way you deal with people. And so a lot of tools rose up against that environment to measure emotional intelligence. Most of them came from a research or an educational background. They were not designed to work in a commercial environment. What Palmer set out to do was design a tool that was specifically designed for use for development. Now, I'll talk a bit more about this later on, but if you're a coach, consultant, trainer, you're interested in development because you sit with a client at time one and you find out what issue are they trying to address, and then you make some intervention of some kind, and then at time two, hopefully, when you look at that issue that they're trying to address, you can see that the intervention got results, that you moved the needle for them. Well, that was something in the EI world that didn't exist before Janus came along. An assessment was designed for that sort of time one, time two development environment. So designed for people like yourselves, coaches, consultants, and trainers, anybody who needed to be able to make direct interventions with people to change behaviors that affected results that are important on the bottom line. First thing he did was he went to people like us, several thousand people through the university, and asked them, what sort of features would you like to see in an ideal development tool? And I won't go through these in all of these in detail, but essentially, let me summarize it. What people said is, we want it as short as possible. We want you to use language which is accessible. We want it to look good, and we want it to look at behavior that can be improved. If you're a coach, a consultant, or a trainer, you're in the behavior change business. You know that when you help people to change some behaviors, that you can help them to change the way they're impacting processes or people. So if you're designing an EI tool for development purposes, for your use, for my use, you have to be measuring something that can be improved. And it also had to take in, I'll talk about that, the individual's context. So he designed a tool that on the front end had all of these features. On the back end, what he did was really clever. He did a factor analysis, if you like, a distillation of all of the tools that had good technical veracity at that point in time. So in common with now, when EI started to emerge, a lot of cowboys came along creating tools that had no technical ability to predict anything. They're the sort of assessments that are created in a couple of days effort, and maybe end up published, if it's honestly published in Cosmopolitan magazine. 10 and 12 question, are you emotionally intelligent type assessments. But correct assessments have a lot of engineering and a lot of work goes into them. So what Palmer did was he found the 6 most technically strong assessments around at that time. He did an analysis of all the items and all the things they measured, and he came up with a distillation of things that matched this, that matched these criteria, that were things that behaviors that could be improved and that had good technical numbers to prove that they could be measured and could be improved. So essentially what he did was he distilled the best of the best at that point in time and put a behavioral bent upon things. And that's really important, you'll see, as we go on. So here's where he landed. And this is what I'm going to show you. I'm going to show you how this helps you build your business. So the where he landed was on a tool that measures 42 items. 42 items means it's fast to take. That's important. There are assessments out there, there are 130, 140 items. People get bored, people get confused, and when they're getting the results fed back, it's very hard to get your head around 100 plus items. So we have 42 items on 6 scales. So 7 items on 6 scales. And you'll see why I'm telling you this in a moment, because it all links up to what we were doing just a few minutes ago. Each of those items, and this is important, is a demonstrable, observable, emotionally intelligent workplace behavior. It's something that people do in the workplace, that they can be observed doing in the workplace, that they can demonstrate in the workplace. And that's important, you'll see as we work through. The assessment, and you'll probably notice these labels almost never or seldom to usually or almost always, looks at and measures how often do people demonstrate these behaviors? So it doesn't look at what's your personality and therefore how do we project you're likely to impact people. Rather, it looks at exactly how are you showing up in the workplace? What are people saying, or seeing, I should say, and what impact is it having upon them? So again, at the risk of repeating this ad nauseum, this is really unique in the sense that it measures a person's demonstrated emotional intelligence. So what in God's name is demonstrated emotional intelligence? Well, let's have a look at it, because you just demonstrated it to yourself just 5 minutes ago. So I'm going to ask you on the chat, if you wouldn't mind, to give me some scores the scores that you got for your great boss. So please, just on the chat there, would you pop up the scores for me that you got for your great boss? And I just want to note them down here. So everybody, if you can just, onto the chat line, give me the score for your great boss. 29, 24, thank you, ladies. Anybody else? 28, anybody else? Excuse me looking down, I'm just taking notes. Anybody else? Give me one more and I'm a happy bunny. Okay, you're all shy. Well, let me tell you that we got that time, we got 29, we got 24, we got 28. And typically what you get is north of 20. So when you're looking at somebody through this lens, you typically get, 24, 28, 29. Sometimes it can be as low as 30 or 20. Occasionally it falls down to 19, but in general, it's north of 20. Let me ask you, please give me the score for your difficult boss now. What score did you have for that challenging boss? So thank you, Nadine. So 10, we got a 5. Wow. We got 11. Anyone else? Okay. So again, we're getting what is pretty much a trend. And that trend tends to be that it's almost always sub 20, very, very rarely above. I'll talk about situations where it can be, but very rarely above 20, and very frequently below. And most of the time, it's like that. We have a range that goes 5, 10, 11, or thereabouts. So it's basically low. So the first thing I want you to notice is just looking at the way they behaved and the way they showed up, there's quite a dramatic difference between those two people. So let's have a look at the second dimension. What sort of, how did this person make you feel? So what words did you put down for how that person made you feel? So please just pop a couple of those up onto the chat box, if you would. Empowered, thank you. Anybody else? $1 million, wow. All green and wrinkled. No, I'm only kidding. Okay, $1 million. Anybody else? Give me 1 or 2 more words and I'll be happy camper. Man, we got a shy crew this morning. Okay, so empowered, $1 million, upbeat, and again, these are the typical sort of responses that we get on this. So the way that person showed up, the behavior that they had an impact. Like I said, when you know about people who walk in the room and they suck the oxygen out of the room, or other people who walk in, the sun comes out. This was somebody who, when they walked in the room, they made you feel like $1 million. They made you feel upbeat. They made you feel empowered. And those, again, are the words we get, positive, valued, upbeat, engaged, lots of different words. What about the difficult boss? What about the more challenging boss? What word did you have down there? Fearful and stressed out. Good Lord. Isn't it a terrible indictment that somebody else can actually make us feel fearful and stressed out? The world is tough enough. You've heard the expression, the VUCA world. Good Lord, it's so VUCA. It's incredible. And we don't need to go to work to get stressed out. There's lots that we can look at on the TV and the newspaper in our lives in general. And it's a terrible indictment that people can make you feel that way. Another one is inadequate, stressed. And again, just notice that there's a difference in night and day between these two people. So the first one showed up in a particular way. Their behaviors measured out on the scoring system that we had as running from 24 up to 29. And they made people feel empowered, $1 million upbeat. The other chap or chapess ran from 5 through 10, 11, and their behavior made people feel fearful, stressed out, inadequate. Fearful, stressed out, inadequate. What did I meet? I missed. No, that was it. Okay. So what about the discretionary effort? Final piece, and then all of the work is mine. So this is your last piece of work for me. What did you put down for how motivated you were to give of your best? What number did you put down for how inclined you were to give your best? So we got a 9. Anyone else there? Help me out, guys. I'm dying here. 8. Thank you. Anyone else? Somebody else. Give me something else. Okay, we got a 9 and 8. Let me tell you what's typical. Again, we typically get 8, 9, 10. Because when you pick your best boss, you picked your best boss because of the way they showed up, the way that they made you feel. And that impact upon you was an engaging impact. And you'll see in the formal research later on just how consistent that is right across every job, every situation on a global basis. Final piece of input. What did you put down for the discretionary effort for that difficult boss? 3. Thank you. 0. Wow. Well, I suppose I say 0. Wow. And sometimes I do get, as I said to you, sometimes we do get minus numbers as well. So, and I got a 2. And again, that's kind of typical. And sometimes you get them in the middle. Occasionally people will say, yeah, 6 or 7. Said because he frightened the hell out of me so much. He stressed me out so much that I did things I didn't know I can do. And yeah, sometimes people can intimidate others into short-term results. But all of the literature says when you engage people by making them feel positive, upbeat, valued, etc., well, then they tend to engage in a positive way. But more importantly, particularly in our demographically challenged world now, they tend to stay, because one of the biggest challenges we have now is hanging on to our best people. The first person there was very much engaging and doing the things, obviously, that tended to make them more retentive, that they were more capable of retaining people. So here's the only learning before we move into this, is that you looked at the behaviors of these 2 bosses. One of them scored right up in the top 20s, others scored down, highest score of 11. One of them made you feel empowered, upbeat, $1 million. Another made you feel fearful, stressed out, inadequate. And you know, the one who made you feel empowered, it got you at an 8 or 9 in terms of the way you were motivated to give out your best. The other one went anywhere from 0 up to a maximum of 3. I think you're starting to see what's really, really obvious is the way people feel and the way you make people feel is really, really important. Oh, you know what? I told you that that was the last thing I was going to ask you. I'm sorry, there's one more. Let me ask you. Actually, no, you know what? I'm going to ask you just to consider this. Just consider, how long is it since you've dealt with those 2 people? Let me tell you what happens in these, when I do this in workshops and you got big groups. Very frequently, the people who are both the upbeat and the great boss and the challenging boss tend to be some years in the past. It depends on the age of the person in general. But what you'll often find is people can be, the longest I've ever had is 32 years. And it was only in the last couple of weeks, it was a boss that somebody worked for, best boss they ever worked for. And 32 years later, they still remember how they made them feel. They still smile when they think about them. Similarly, you get people who say 20 years later that they still grimace, they still feel inadequate, stressed, and they still revisit that negative past when they think of that less than perfect boss model. And that's important because you know, and I know, that you're going to turn up some days in the workplace and you're going to have a lousy day. And you're going to be tearing the heads off people, and you're going to break away from your normal, upbeat, emotionally intelligent way of doing things. But you know what? People let that go. They know that we all have bad days. And instead of saying that's just typical of it, they say, something must be wrong. Give them a break. On the other side, that negative boss, once you've garnered that reputation from the behavior you've shown up with for long enough, if you show up with different behavior that's any way positive, you know what people say? Say, what's she looking for? What's he want? So once you get a reputation that stays there, unless it's changed to the observation of others of how you make them feel and how you turn up. And Maya Angelou absolutely nailed it. She said, people will never forget the way you made them feel, which is a kind of nice way of saying what all of the research says about emotional intelligence. Now, let me congratulate you because you've just used the Janos emotional intelligence model for the first time ever. Some of you may have used it before, but let's say if you're the first time you've heard about Janos, well, let me tell you, you just used the model. Because what we did was we looked at the six scales of the Janos model, and we're looking at the leadership version now. I'll explain the difference between the two versions in a few moments. And the first scale that we measure is self-awareness, the extent to which a person is aware of the way their emotions and their moods are impacting the decisions they're making, the behaviors that they're displaying. And on the outer ring there, the gray ring, that's what we call a positive or productive being state. And at the high end of those, the 5 end of that scale, we would talk about somebody being present. They're aware of what's going on with them. And at the low end, we would talk about them being disconnected. They are reacting to their emotions without having any idea of what's going on. Now, I say that you use the model already because what you did was you used just one of the 7 items to rate those two people. So we have 7 items in self-awareness, and you used just one of them. Now, we used a binary situation. We used a black and a white person. We used Darth Vader and Luke Skywalker. And that'll work well with one item. One item is all you need to separate those two folks. But the majority of us on each of these scales, we sit somewhere in between the top end and the bottom end of that. Some of the behaviors that we display serve us really well. They show our self-awareness, and some of them don't. So we have 7 behaviors in there on the self-awareness scale so that you can grade people and see, okay, where are they on a continuum that runs from disconnected to present? What are they doing that's good? Keep doing it. What are they doing that's not serving them? Stop doing it or make a change in that behavior. So you've already used this model, and for the self-awareness scale, you use that item. And then we looked at awareness of others. So awareness of others is the same as self-awareness through the looking glass. It's basically the extent to which you're aware of others' moods and emotions and how they affect the decisions they're making and the behaviors that they're deploying. And at the high end, a word that's really, really topical in leadership circles right now, the positive productive state where you're really in the zone is empathetic. You're demonstrating awareness of other people's mood and emotions, and the bottom end is insensitive. And let me dispel something very quickly. Sometimes people, when they see empathetic, they think that means sympathetic. They think that means a pushover who's a yes person who's always going to agree with everybody. Let me tell you that you can appreciate where Derek is coming from, understand why he feels emotional about an issue, walk a mile in his shoes and really appreciate his perspective. Be empathetic, but totally agree with him, or disagree with him, I should say. And the 7 items that we have on here, one of which you used is, which is makes others feel appreciated, is designed to measure where the person is on that scale. Quickly on the other scales, authenticity, the extent to which what you say is the truth, the extent to which you speak your mind, and speak your mind in a way that is sensitive to the needs of other people. So at the high end is genuine, at the low end is untrustworthy, and you looked at what extent is this person open and honest about mistakes. Now, if you look at any of the literature on decision making, what it says is that we make our decisions with 2 parts of the brain. One of them is the cognitive up the front. We weigh the rational pros and cons. And the other part is the emotional part of the brain, where we make decisions based upon how we feel about them, how they impact us, how they're impacting other people, how other people feel about them. And when we talk about emotional reasoning, which is the next scale, We're talking about that ability to use both that cognitive pros and cons, the front part of the brain, and that emotional information. Because after all, if you're aware of your emotions and moods and how they're impacting the decisions you're making, and you're aware of those of others, well, then that's data that can help you to reason more effectively. It gives you a more expanded range of options versus the person who's just living in that cognitive part of their head. And you use makes ethical decisions. One of the hardest things to do when you're under the pressure of making a decision that will not serve you, but is the right thing to do, is to make the ethical decision. Self-management is getting a lot of play in your clients right now. For the first time ever in the United States last year, claims for mental injuries from employers exceeded claims from physical injuries from employers, because we are in an increasingly unstable, difficult, and stressful world. Well, self-management is the ability to be resilient. It's the ability to deal with the difficult emotions and the stresses that we find in our everyday business, and to remain resilient, to be able to bounce back. And the item that you used there was they manage their emotions effectively in difficult situations. And notice, this is observable. You can see if Derek does that or not. And the final scale that we measure is inspiring performance, at least in the leadership version. It's called inspiring performance. And essentially, this is just about what impact you have when you walk in a room. So inspiring performance is, I'm empowered by this person. They make me feel enthusiastic, energetic, upbeat. It's talking about everything that the positive psychology revolution has told us in the last 20 years is critical to creating a good work environment. And the item we used for that was recognizing others' hard work and achievements. So you've already used the assessment. In a real life, what had happened is somebody would sit down, they complete the 42 items online, and we'd be able to look and see, where are they in self-awareness, where are they in awareness of others, what are the areas they need to work on, and specifically, what behaviors are they displaying that they might want to adjust, and what are the ones they're displaying that are working for them that they want to make sure that they keep demonstrating them. Once they complete the assessments, well, then we have reports. Now, I want to talk to you as we close off over the next 10 or 15 minutes. I want to talk to you about how you use this to drive your business. The reports are designed specifically to be used by people like us, coaches, consultants, and trainers. I won't go into the details of the various different flavors. The 360 is just, I'm looking at, I get to look at myself and how I perceive myself turning up. My boss reviews me, my peers, and my direct reports. 180 is, I'm just looked at by one audience, maybe my workmates or my direct reports, or just a single audience, and then the self is, as the name suggests. Notice the word up the top, workplace. This is a version of the assessment that is designed to be used by absolutely anybody. It's agnostic, it's role blind, it doesn't care what industry you work in, it doesn't care whether you're the boss man or the janitor. These reports can be used in any position. We have leadership versions that are specifically designed to be used by those who have a leadership or a management responsibility and who get their results through other people. And the major difference is not the model, it's the items and the questions and the phraseology that's used in it. Let me show you what I mean when I talk about the way this plays in an environment like ours, you know, where you've got coaches, consultants, and trainers. The key word there, I think, is actionable. When you get this information back on a client, you want to be able to help them to take action that's going to move them from time one through to a desirable time two. So when we measure these in real life, you just did it on a piece of paper. We ask first, say, for example, demonstrates awareness of the way they feel. We say, how important is that to you that Derek demonstrates that? 1, not at all. 2, slightly important, all the way up to 5. Now that's really, really useful. You're getting a context. You're asking everybody who feeds back on this person, how important are these behaviors to you? Imagine you're the boss. Your direct reports are telling you what they expect to see. Your boss is telling you what she expects to see. your peers and others are telling you what they expect to see. They're setting an internal standard. And only then do we ask them, and how well did they demonstrate those behaviors? That approach of getting first, what is the importance level for each of these items and each of these scales, and how do you demonstrate it, gives us a lot we can do in training, coaching, and consulting situations at the individual level. Imagine this is your report. So we've looked at 42 items, and for each of those items, we give you an importance score. I want you to imagine this is coming from your boss, and she has said it's a 4.4. It's nearly 5. It's well up beyond important, and it's up towards highly important. And she's saying, I see you demonstrated at a level that's about average, 3.2. When we get those two scores, the first thing we do is we calculate the difference, or the delta. And we use a very clever, simple traffic light analogy to communicate that information back. So you can see here that when there's a large gap, in this case 1.2, you get that kind of orangey red color. When there's a smaller gap down to about 0.6, from 0.1 or 1.0 down to about 0.6, we get a yellow. And when it's actually within range, when we say that it's pretty much aligned, what they're expecting is what they're getting, we're getting green. If I'm coaching this person, if I'm training this person, what I'm helping them to do is identify what are the areas in green that you want to keep doing. What are the areas in red that are really derailing your relationship with these people? And if there are no areas in red, what are the areas in yellow that you want to look at? So it's highly, highly actionable. One final thing that's really important here, I think, is this box. And this is just a norm. It's just it's basically the range of scores achieved by the average population globally. So if your score falls below that box, it means that your score is below a global benchmark. You're lower than the average that's typical in the world out there. If it's inside that box, it's consistent with you're about the same as the average. And if it's above, well, then you've got the up arrow. So what I just want you to see is there is an enormous amount of information, and it's all about taking action, because nothing happens to change behavior unless you can identify exactly what needs to be changed and how you go about changing it. So the whole approach in Genos is give these reports, and then we give something else called Development Tips Workbook, which is like a dictionary for each person who completes the assessment of development actions and ideas for how they can raise their scores on each of those 42 scales. So everything is about driving action. So how do you build your coach, consulting, and training business with emotional intelligence? First thing you have to recognize is emotional intelligence is a success factor in every part of every organization. The single most robust finding in the social sciences is that people do better when they feel valued, proud, optimistic, and cheerful than they do when they feel worried, depressed, and inadequate. And I don't really need to sell that to you, because you already saw it yourself. When you were feeling empowered, upbeat, and $1 million, you were giving 8 and 9 in terms of your motivation to give the best. When you were feeling fearful and stressed out, the scores that you were giving for your discretionary effort was between 0 and 3. This is a very simple but very significant study that was done over several organizations, really fast. One of the universities in Austria, one in Australia, one in Copenhagen, they looked at several hundred organizations that they separated into high-performance workplaces and low-performance workplaces. And the way they did that was using objective criteria. So they looked at things like earnings per share, profitability, employee turnover. And so they were able to decide this bunch of companies is a high-performing workplace, this bunch of companies is a low-performing workplace. And then they polled the people that work for them for the extent to which they felt anxious, valued, proud, optimistic, cheerful, loved, fearful, inadequate, etc. Look at the graphs. Notice that the blue graph is very much smaller on the right-hand side of that, on the worried, depressed, inadequate, and very much higher on the valued, proud, optimistic, and cheerful, and vice versa for the red graph. The single most robust finding, and you don't need the research, is people do better when they feel positive about things. there is a direct link between the way people feel and the way they engage. You just measured your discretionary effort earlier on. Well, this is a study of several hundred employees in IBM spread across several regions, and each of those dots is an employee. Across the bottom, you can see that we measured first what was the employee's perception of the emotional intelligence of their bosses. So across the bottom is a scale that goes from 0 to 100, and as you move from left to right, you're seeing a measure of no emotional intelligence up to high emotional intelligence. Up the left-hand side, we also asked those same people, to what extent are you engaged? And we used an engagement survey to put them as actively engaged, not engaged, or engaged. Each of these dots is a person. So you see this person here, I'm hoping you're seeing, let me just see if I can get a pointer. I believe I can. Let me see, yeah. You see this person here, okay? This person down here, you can see that their boss's emotional intelligence is somewhere around 15. They're actively disengaged. Notice that as you go up, that as we go up through the scores on emotional intelligence, we start to rise up, that the employees are rising up in their level of engagement. And this reflects the findings in so many other studies. Bottom line, when a boss is emotionally intelligent, like your great boss was, well, then people tend to engage more effectively with them. And by the time you get to the 75 percentile, you see that there's almost nobody, there's certainly nobody disengaged, and there's almost nobody engaged. Or there's almost nobody, there's nobody actively disengaged. There's one or two not engaged, and everybody else is actually engaged. So let me just kill that for a moment. Just gonna get rid of that. How do I clear all drawing? There we go. So bottom line is that, oh, I didn't mean to do that. I beg your pardon. When it goes wrong, it goes wrong. View. I beg your pardon. Okay, sorry about that. Yeah, so once it went up above the 75% score, there were no more disengaged folks. But, and that's one of the things that Genos does that nobody else does. In our emotional intelligence assessment, there is an option built in that allows you, as you're gathering the data on the perception of employees of their boss's emotional intelligence, at the same time, in the same sitting, in the same assessment, to gather information on the extent to which they're engaged. It's a very logical thing to do, so it always surprises me that we're the only people to do it. So you can measure both engagement and emotional intelligence in the same sitting. Now, how you make people feel is important in absolutely every endeavor. And a lot of the time when we talk about emotional intelligence, people tend to think it's all about leadership. This is a study that we did with Sanofi Aventis. We put half of a very large team of salespeople through EI training. We put the other half through conventional training. And you can see that the blue, the EI trained people, dramatically outperformed people only 4 or 5 months later. So bottom line is, absolutely everything where there are people involved are potential applications for the GI model. So, our EIM, Genos International Model. So if you have any clients who are concerned about employee engagement, which you do, or you have clients who are concerned about team working and productivity and getting them working, I'm sure you do. If you're about increasing sales performance, improving customer service, or creating a positive environment for change programs, you can do that. Here's how you do it. We live in a world that nobody else in the AI business can work in, and that is the time one, time two. So this is the world that we train you when we certify you, we train you to work in. One, you measure how candidates show up with the target audience. So let's say you're trying to engage a team of employees. You measure, one, how engaging you are, and secondly, what your emotional intelligence is like. Then you make an intervention. So that intervention and that action planning might be around training, coaching, consulting, or all three, but either way, you do something that's designed at the individual level to move behavior. And then at time two, you go back in to see what happened. So This is how this can be used to build your business. Any situation where you have a client trying to improve results in any situation where people are a factor, client service, sales, engagement, well, then the EI model from Genos matches it perfectly because it gives you that time one, time two capability. We have a who's who of clients who have used these tools for engagement, for leadership change, for inoculating people against the effects of change, and for increasing sales results. And like everybody, we have a who's who of clients to prove that what we do works. The way we go to market in general is through coaches, consultants, and trainers. And that means that we have to be credible to be able to do that. We are one of only a handful of people, emotional intelligence assessments, that are approved by Dan Goleman's Consortium for Research on Emotional Intelligence in Organizations. And we're one of only three assessment organizations who are actual business partners of the ICF, the International Coach Federation. And being a business partner means that they looked at our technology, they looked at our research, and they blessed it. So we have very strong credentials, a huge amount of peer-reviewed research, which you're welcome to look at on the site. Here's how we work with partners. Your relationship with Genos begins in an intensive 2-day face-to-face certification program. And what you learn in that program is how to design and deliver emotional intelligence assessments, working with our tools, and we spend a lot of time getting you expert in actually working directly, coaching, presenting, and training with the tools, so that at the end of 2 days, you go out with a lot of expertise from one of our really top-class trainers. If you're an ICF coach, you earn competency hours and resource development hours for it. We give you two other things along with the certification program. The first one is, this is a completely out-of-the-box 30, 60, or 90-minute briefing system. It consists of a slide deck, facilitator script, 20-page participant booklet, designed if you want to do presentations to things like the Chamber, the Rotary Club, or just introductory presentation to existing clients. But to make life easy, we also give you a complete one-day program on the day you qualify. So on the day you walk out of certification, we give you a program called Applied Emotional Intelligence. If you've ever designed a one-day training program, you know it takes time. We've saved you that time. You get the deck, you get the facilitator's guide, participants' workbooks, exercise materials, and we put them all in a format that you can, so they're in Word for Windows and they're in PowerPoint, so you can tailor them up for your particular needs. Finally, one of the things we're really good on in Genos is support. And we've created something called Genos University. It's an online system. It's there 24/7. It's growing continually with video training on what works for our very best partners worldwide. So we have courses on reports, on how to sales and market things, on how our system works. And you may wonder about the Mosquito series. David Revson, the founder of Revlon Cosmetics, many years ago said, I am like a mosquito in a nudist colony. He said, I know exactly what I should be doing, but I don't know where to start. And most people come off our training and our certification really, really excited, really buzzing with everything they do, but they've so much information they don't know where to start. That's what we have the Mosquito series for. It has a series of video training programs that are designed specifically for what do I do next? I just finished certification, what do I do next? That's available 24/7. There are dozens of different training programs in there. You can go in anytime you like, and that remains free throughout for as long as you're a Genos partner. So it all begins with certification. And the certification programs are in these locations over the next coming weeks and months. And I know there are a number of people from South Africa on with us right now. We have one starting there next week, and then a number of other dates. I don't actually have the pricing on these, but do me a favor and drop me. I'll tell you what, we're going to reach out to you anyway, because I just remembered that I didn't put the pricing in for the Cape Town program. So apologies for that, which is coming up next week. So Let me, because I'm conscious that I'm a couple minutes over things, let me go to the Q&A and see, do I have any questions in there? Nadine, are the best assessments always the ones you have to pay for? I suspect that that's probably asked a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but are the best assessments always the ones you have to pay for? You know what? The worst assessments are the ones you really pay for, because the people that get the worst assessments are the ones who are really making the people that work with them and work for them pay big time. But Nadine, you pay for them all. A couple of other questions that often come up, and I got one before it started, was how long should you be between assessments? And typically between a time 1 and time 2, 6, 9, 12 months, it really depends on what you're trying to measure. But if you want to see any impact, it's generally probably 9 to 12 months, although 6 is not unusual. Let me see if I have anything else there. Do you have to pay to use the report? Yes, you do, Nadine. We'll send you on details, or somebody will be in touch just to talk to you about it. But the cost is a cost per assessment, and there's a different price for 360, 180, and self-reports. Our partners get a discount, obviously, on those, a fairly substantial discount that allows them to build a good margin onto their onto any assessments they put into their clients. So let me just ask, any more questions there just before I finish up? And I apologize, I'm about 3 or 4 minutes over the time. Any more questions? Okay. Well then, let me, oh, look at my hair. Let me thank you very much for taking the time to attend this morning. If any questions come up after the session that you wish you had asked, please just reach out. We're going to reach out to you anyway to make you an offer if you're interested in the Genos certification. And in the meantime, I want you to just thank you for your time, your energy, and your effort in attending this morning. Thank you so much. Take care.